So Event Provenance Registry, it's a name for an event-driven system that we built. If you guys were here for Ben's talk earlier, it's very similar to what they've built, except that I did it in 2019. And Ben and I worked together on CDEvents, so I bet she stole it from me anyway. All right, so the question is that I've got this internal tool and I want to open source it. And so the question is, should I open source it, right? Because most tools, internal tools, are not useful to the rest of the real world. So you've got to ask yourself a question, does this solve a common problem that other developers or organizations face? And usually you think it does. You're probably, like, if you needed a new CLI to talk to deps.dev, that would be pretty handy, right? But then you have to ask, is there a demand for the tool, right? How many Python linters do we need, all right? But I can tell you what, there's some dude out there writing a new one, all right? Then you got to ask yourself, is the project maintainable? And that really comes down to, you've got to establish a community, right? So does the team that you have that's going to open source this project have the cycles to maintain it until you can build a community and trick people like Ralph into coming and helping you, okay? And you got to be serious about this because nobody likes abandoned projects, especially not me. Then you need to make sure that you've got sufficient documentation and testing so that people can contribute. Because guys like Andrew write bad code and they'll come, and if you don't have the tests, Andrew will get that code in and he'll destroy your project. You need to protect yourself from that. And then the other thing you need to do is that you need to have a plan for handling contributions from the community. Now, if you work for a proprietary company like I do, the lawyers have a plan, okay? And you follow what the lawyers say and you don't argue. But if you're an individual contributor or an individual person doing a personal project, have a code of conduct and have a way to contribute, okay? All right, so my story. So in 2019, the CTO came to us and challenged us to move from large ship events into full CI/CD. And at the time, we had pipelines full of Jenkins and Garrett. And I wasn't excited about chaining together a bunch of Jenkins jobs and having this linear flow in order to meet the speed that they wanted to deliver stuff at. So I wanted GitOps, and I wanted to use Git as the source of the truth for all of the pipelines. And we could have done it with Jenkins, but I just didn't think it was going to scale. We already had thousands of free-flow Jenkins jobs running around, and then we had thousands of pipeline files in in our Git repos, that anytime we had to go they were identical, and anytime I had to go make a change to them, I had to touch 1,000 repos. It did not scale well at all. Right, so the other thing I wanted was proof that the task was run, right? Some sort of provenance detail on what was run, when it was run, and who ran it. And I wanted to be able to ask the question, did we run the tests? Did we build the artifacts? And I also wanted to be able to ask the question, like, what version of code was run that was in the run that we used to build that artifact? And then I wanted to be asynchronous. I wanted to be able to finish my build and kick off all of my scans, all of them. And then I wanted to also do a deployment and run automated tests over here while I'm running my scans so that I could increase the velocity of my, and reduce my time to the customer, right? Shorten that timeline. And we did. We went from quarterly ship events to I can ship software in about 8 hours now. And anyway, we'll get to that. All right. So the CTO comes and says, I want full CI/CD. And I said, awesome. Now, why did I go through the trouble to build an event-driven system? I needed it to be decoupled from my CI. Because guess what happens? You migrate from one CI to another CI to another CI, right? And that migration can't happen like that when you have thousands and thousands of jobs. And even now, we've moved on to GitHub Actions, but I still have tons of Jenkins servers running and doing stuff. And it all tied together because what I did was I decoupled the event-driven system from all of the CI. I'm trying to avoid vendor lock-in, right? And that's what happens when you pick a platform and you go all in on it, you get vendor lock-in. And then the cost to move becomes so high that you might even do something silly like fork the CI and make it where you can keep and fork it and keep that piece alive for yourself. Don't ask me if I've ever done that. All right, so I got two problems. I got lots of problems. Problem number one, we had to keep the software, had to keep shipping software, right? I can't flip a switch, right? We got these pipelines are running 24/7. I've got teams in Beijing, I've got teams in India, and I got teams in America. This thing's on 24/7. Problem number two, we already had several years invested in all these Jenkins jobs, and we weren't going to go fix them right away. So we had all this CI tooling, and what it really boiled down to is that I needed an event-driven system that the lowest common denominator was curl, right? So that I could go into a Jenkins job and I could add a bash script that curled, jammed together a piece of JSON that told me what this thing did, and the bash script curled it up to the event server. Now, the server, and I've taken a lot of technical detail out again, but the idea is that I've got this service, you post your receipt to it, we store the receipt in the Postgres database. That's my provenance. The server is the only thing that talks to the Kafka topic, and the Kafka topic is locked down. The idea here is that there's only one source of the truth, and everything else that's listening to that Kafka bus that goes and fires off and runs all the SCH and the SAS scans and all that stuff knows that when a message hits that bus, it's the truth. That's all the technical detail you're going to get. So what was the plan? Well, the plan was to open source the project. And I didn't think we would be the only ones who would need this thing, right? I also thought it was a good way to get feedback on the design implementation. So I'm like, yeah, let's open source this thing. Unfortunately, we had a really short deadline, really short runway. I did the first commit in May, and that thing was live in January 2020. Okay, so 8 months from first commit to production. And then we had automated, and I was working with my testing team at the same time, and they were creating automation that was going to use this thing when it went live. And it went live in January. And so we said, okay, well, let's just get this thing into production, make sure we get the bugs out of it, and we'll open source it later. That's the key word. You heard what I said, open source it later, okay? Now, watch how this spirals out of control. Okay, mistakes were made, all right? I tried to find an open source project upstream that did what I wanted it to do, right? And I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but you go and you find this open source project upstream and you pull it off the shelf and you set it down and you go, I don't think it does what I want it to do. So you grab the other one, you go, well, this one does some of it and that one does some of it, but none of them do each. Now, bring in the CD Foundation. So at the time, I was just getting involved in the CD Foundation, and the great thing about the CD Foundation is that once you're in these SIGs and you're in there, it's like family, right? And it becomes really easy to go contribute to a project, right? I've contributed to CDEvents. I'm in the CDEvent work group sometimes. And it makes it really easy, right? None of the projects I needed were in the CDEvents or in CD Foundations, right? So now I'm coming in as an outsider who works for a proprietary company trying to jump in and make friends with a community that looks at me and goes, oh, dude, you work for a $3 billion company. You're not an open source guy. And then I got all these features I want to put in your stuff. And they're like, well, maybe we don't want those. And so we didn't think we could get that done, that relationship built in the community for one of the services like Argo. Had an event thing they were working on. It was really nascent, but I really wanted to contribute to it and start using it, but we just didn't think we could get it done, and we were really, really up against it, time-wise. So we decided we'd open source our stuff later. And we built it ourselves, then we decided we'd open source it later. Because not invented here syndrome. All right, so the very first mistake, well, the second mistake we made is that we didn't start open source from the beginning. Ralph, you and I were talking about this the other day. If you're gonna open source your software, just start open source right from the beginning, okay? Don't go, well, we'll build it in-house for a while and then we'll open source it. because I'm going to show you what's going to happen. And then, so we had some problems at the time too, and we made poor decisions. We were like, we didn't know what this thing's supposed to look like. Nobody's ever built this type of event-driven system before that was also a provenance system. And so I didn't know what it was going to look like, and we were still figuring out the architecture, and I didn't want to have arguments with guys like Adam over there about architecture when I'm trying to get this thing done, and I've been at this for 25 years, and Adam's new, he's smart, he's great, but I just steer this project and get it done and get it in so that we're producing software really fast in-house. Oh, and I want to also point out that the in-house project was a complete success. So while this story of woe of trying to open source this internal tool, it sounds horrible, like I just made mistake after mistake. The internal tool, if it dies, everything stops, right? And it's been running 24/7 for 5 years, and it's only failed once, right? And that's when they ripped the carpet out from under it, all right? The IT guy said, oh, are you using that VM? Anyway, thanks, guys, I appreciate it. There goes all our bonuses. Anyway, so the other problem we ran into was our build system. So we got a pipeline, and we're getting ready to augment the pipeline, but we didn't have any way to build open source software that was hosted in public repos. And so what I would have the only solutions we could come up with was we'll have an internal repo that has all of our internal tooling data in it, and then we'll pull the source code from the external repo. And we're like, oh man, this is a lot of work. Okay, well let's just get this thing built in-house, and then we'll open source it later. You guys like Cthulhu type stuff? Because this is when it slowly crept in, okay? And this is when things went completely south, all right? My dream of open sourcing this project, a year and a half in, got shot in the head. So I was a 5-man team that started it, that did the first 8 months. We blew through it like fire, right? We set a new way to do our coding. I had Golang CI. You guys do any Go coding? Golang CI lint? Anybody know? Yeah. Do you know how many flags that thing has? Yeah, I turned them all on. I turned them all on. It was a battle to get code committed with not you and your 2 people review. It was a battle between you and Golang CI lint, right? And it hated you. It still hates me to this day. Anyway, so, but that's not what killed us. That made the code better. What killed us was we ballooned out to a 10-person team, okay? Still feed them with 2 pizzas, right? But, well, I mean, I eat a lot, so maybe 3 pizzas. But we ballooned out to a 10-man team. Now, if you're leading a project and you have 4 people, and one of them's very paranoid, and the other 2 just do what they're told, and then one of them really likes the chaos, which is I do, and you could control the project, right? And you're like, okay, you go work on this database thing today, and then we're trying to do cross work so that we all know all of the stuff. Well, we get to 10 people, you can't cross all of the stuff, and so what happened was I lost some control over some of the things that were going on, and I let one of my 4 run that piece of it. And that's when the business logic crept in. So we got this library, right? And they're like, I'm like, the business logic watchers, right? These are the things that watch for events that are going to do something very specific to our company inside that will be of no use to Mark at all. No use at all, right? That crept into the library. And then they're like, oh, well, this means less duplication. This will be great. Look, some duplication is okay, all right? Don't think that it's not. I talked yesterday about stop using libraries that are string builders. Just write the code to build the string because you're wasting space and any stuff like that, all right? So it climbs into the library, and then they start ripping the business logic out of these external services and stuffing it in the library so they can use it somewhere else. And it starts to grow and grow and grow until I've got 2 modules in the library that are nothing but business logic, and you can't build any of my services that I wanted to open source without that library. So, yeah, I know. Hey, wait, I got an extra 5 minutes. Oh. I've only been up here 16 minutes. Design mistakes. Shoot the QR code. We got a user story on the CD Foundation. It goes through like the technical details of the event-driven system. And then so oh wait, you want me to go back? Yeah, okay. All right, so you asked the question again, should I open source my internal tools? Maybe. And I got a whole bunch of lines here, but I'm down to 5 lines, 5 minutes. So, oh yeah. So this is what our internal tools look like. It's a hammer driving a screw. Because when you have a hammer, everything's a nail. I had to cut like all of that content, thanks. So we had to ask ourselves, do we clean up or start over, right? So we had these massive meetings where we sat down and looked at the code base and we're like, we could bust the business logic out into its own library and then have a core library that we could open source, and then we could open source the services because we pulled all the business logic out of them, and we're not going to open source the ones with business logic in them anyway. Remember back when I told you this thing's been running 24/7 for 6 years and it's only gone down once? Don't mess with battle-tested code, okay? Do not, if you were a platform engineer, do not touch the battle-tested code until you have to, all right? And if you have to, greenfield the other solution and then slowly migrate over, right? So you can read the slide, so it's pretty cool. Anyway, so we got a second chance. I went to management and I said, look, nobody works on Friday anyway, right? So, and I can't find anybody after 2 o'clock on Friday. So give me 2 hours on Friday every afternoon to go rewrite this thing and we'll open source it. And my boss, who worked with me at an open source company before we got to a proprietary company, said, sure. And I was like, cool. And so this is where we built Event Provenance Registry. Now we took all of the mistakes we made, the design mistakes, you can go read about all that process. We took all those mistakes and we only made some of them again. And we're not finished, right? A couple of quick things. The thing that got me fired up about this was the CD Foundation. And when I joined the CD Foundation, I started to work in the software supply SIG, I was like, I really want to get my open source stuff out again. Like, I missed working in an open source company. I missed working on open source stuff, but I also very much like the amount of money I make in the proprietary company. If you were here for Ben's thing, Ben talked about CDEvents. CDEvents are awesome, okay? And we need people to come help with us on Mondays and maybe Tuesdays, and we need people to come and join and hang out and talk with Ben and I and Andrea, who's not here, who is amazing, about CDEvents and help us move them forward. So how did the CDF and CDEvents help with EPR? I kind of went through it. The SIGs really got me fired up and drove me to go and do this. So here I am in May 2023. We finally open sourced this internal tool. And then EPR is not CDEvents specific. The payload is ambiguous, but you can definitely encapsulate CDEvents in these events, along with in toto provenance in another event. And then so the reality of open source is we started out with the best intentions. We improved everything that we made mistakes on internally, and it felt like a real open source project, and Cthulhu got us. So I ask one last time, should you open source your internal tools? Probably not. We haven't had anybody really interested in the project. I've done a 6-hour workshop and a presentation, and I got another 6-hour workshop coming up in New York, and I'm doing this presentation here. And so if any of you guys want to come help with EPR, let me get to it. The electric sheep are still alive, and here. That's EPR, the GitHub repository, and that's my workshop. And there's a Python SDK also in my personal area. So anybody who wants to get that, give me 5 seconds to let everybody get a picture of that. You gotta let me get to my punchline. I mean, get to that punchline. Well, it's not really a punchline. This is my bit. How do you set it up? Yeah, well, so if you've got a bit, you have to stick with the bit, right? And the bit are the electric sheep. Everybody got it? And then I'm Smitty, and I'm afraid of robots. So there you go. Ask me anything. Do we have time for a question?
We have time for a question.
I didn't really go into the technical detail because it was more a story of how it took me 5 years to open source something that I should have open sourced from the beginning.
Yeah.
I could have said that and just walked out.
You know what? I mean, since we don't have any questions, I appreciate that. The concept and the approach of, hey, should we open source this, or like start from the beginning. It's like default to open source if you can, and then you don't have to keep going back and around. So.
Are you okay with the question?
Yeah.
Didn't the lawyers panic at the thought of you open sourcing from the beginning?
Did the lawyers panic?
So the good thing about this is this has got nothing to do with what my company does. Right? If it had anything to do with what my company did, they would have freaked out, right? So, and then, here's my other piece of advice to you. If you work at a proprietary company, and I'm not talking about you red hatters back there. If you work at a proprietary company, okay, and you have an open source project you want to do and it's personal, do not work on it on company time. Do not work on it on the company laptop, period. Never. Not even if you're off hours. Do not. Okay? Because I'm guaranteeing you somewhere, those lawyers have written it up where they own that IP. Okay? So the workshop and the Python stuff that I did was all done off hours on my own machines. So I still own it. And then my company's pretty cool, and they don't really care about platform engineering anyway, so we're okay.
Yeah. And
right?
don't use a remote desktop as well, because that will get you in trouble too.
Same
So.